You are standing in front of a wall that stopped a musket ball in 1461, not concrete, not steel, just dirt, ash, and something your grandfather would have called common sense. And that same wall is still standing today in a small village outside Istanbul, holding up a roof that has outlived 12 generations of the family that built it. What you are about to hear is the exact formula the Ottoman masons used after the fall of Constantinople to build walls. Stronger than modern concrete, using nothing but soil from their own backyard, wood ash from their stoves, and a technique the Amish carried quietly into Lancaster County almost 400 years later. The first time I walked into one of these old Amish barns near Millersburg, Ohio, I ran my hand along a wall that felt like stone and asked the old man what it was made of. He looked at me, half smiling, and said one word: dirt. I did not believe him. So I spent the next 2 years finding out why he was right, and why nobody in the modern building industry wants you to know. And before you close this video thinking this is only for people building a new house from scratch, listen close. What I am about to show you can be applied to the crawl space, the basement wall, and the outbuildings of a home you already own. No permits, no contractors, no permission needed. Now here is what nobody tells you. The dirt under your feet, the soil in your own yard, contains everything a wall needs to stand for 500 years. The ancient builders knew it, the Ottomans perfected it, the Amish preserved it, and somewhere along the way, between the invention of Portland cement in 1824 and the industrial building boom after World War II, we forgot it on purpose. Because you cannot sell a bag of cement to a man who can make his own walls from the dirt in his garden. The technique has a name. It is called stabilized rammed earth, and the version I am going to walk you through today uses one specific ingredient that transforms ordinary soil into a material that laboratory tests at Auburn University measured at over 2,500 pounds per square inch of compressive strength. For comparison, standard residential concrete tests at around 3,000. But rammed earth, done correctly with the ash technique, lasts 3 times longer, insulates 10 times better, and costs almost nothing to make. Here is what you need to understand about the soil in your yard. Most American homeowners have no idea what is underneath them. They mow the grass, plant a few tomatoes, and never think about it again. But that top 18 inches of earth, the clay-heavy subsoil that starts about a foot down, is one of the most versatile building materials on the planet. The Amish know this. Every Amish farm I have ever visited in Holmes County has a small pit somewhere on the property where they dig their own clay for repairs. They mix it with straw, with sand, with lime, and sometimes with the one ingredient that changes everything: wood ash, the white powdery leftover from the stove that most people sweep out and throw in the trash. Wood ash is not garbage. It is potassium carbonate, calcium oxide, and silica in a form that has been pre-treated by fire. When you mix it with clay-rich soil and a small amount of water, something remarkable happens at the molecular level. The alkaline compounds in the ash react with the aluminum silicates in the clay and form what chemists call a pozzolanic bond. That is a fancy way of saying the mixture starts to behave like natural cement. It hardens, it stops absorbing water, and over time, it actually gets stronger. A study out of Penn State Extension in 2019 confirmed that soil samples treated with a 15% ash mixture showed a 340% increase in compressive strength after 28 days of curing. 340% from something people throw away every winter. Here is how the Ottomans did it in 1453, and here is how the Amish still do it today. You start with subsoil, not topsoil. Topsoil is full of organic matter and it will rot inside your wall. You want the yellowish or reddish clay layer that sits below the black. You screen it through a 1/4-inch mesh to remove roots and stones. Then you mix, by volume, 7 parts soil, 2 parts clean sand, and 1 part wood ash. Add water slowly until the mixture holds its shape. When you squeeze a handful, and it breaks cleanly in half. Not muddy, not dry. The old Amish men call this the drop test. If you drop a ball of it from waist height and it holds together but cracks on impact, it is ready. You pack this mixture into wooden forms, 6 inches at a time, and you ram it down with a heavy tamper until it rings solid. Layer by layer, 6 inches becomes 4, 4 inches becomes stone. When you remove the forms 2 days later, what you have is not a wall of dirt, it is a wall of manufactured sedimentary rock, and it will outlast every stick-built house on your street. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. Every older home in America, especially anything built before 1980, has weak points that this exact mixture can reinforce without a single permit or contractor. I am talking about crawl space piers that have cracked, foundation corners that have settled, root cellar walls that leak, outbuilding footings that have shifted. You can mix a small batch of this stabilized earth in a wheelbarrow and pack it into any of these weak points as a reinforcement layer. I did this myself on the northwest corner of my own basement 3 years ago. There was a hairline crack in the block wall where water had been seeping in every spring. 2 contractors quoted me between $4,000 and $7,000 to fix it. I mixed up about 40 pounds of ash stabilized clay from my own yard, packed it into the crack from the outside after digging down about 3 feet, and let it cure for a week. That crack has not leaked a single drop since. Total cost, $0. Total time, 1 Saturday afternoon. And if this small window into what the old builders knew has your attention, understand that this is one technique out of dozens. Everything I have spent the last decade digging out of Amish workshops, old USDA bulletins, and forgotten farm manuals lives inside what I call the complete field vault, the full 3-volume collection covering the heating, cooling, pantry, pest control, and off-grid systems these families quietly use every day. There is a special limited time offer on it right now, linked in the description below, and you can scan the QR code on your screen to see it. That is the rest of the buried archive. Now, let me show you the part of this story that made me angriest when I found it. Here is where the story gets uncomfortable, because rammed earth was not always suppressed. In fact, from 1780 to about 1920, it was one of the most common building methods in the American countryside. The Rural New Yorker magazine ran multiple articles between 1876 and 1904 promoting earthen construction as cheaper, stronger, and healthier than wood framing. A USDA Farmers Bulletin from 1926, number 1500, titled "Rammed Earth Walls for Buildings," gave step-by-step instructions to any farmer who wanted to build his own home from the soil under his feet. President Franklin Pierce lived in a rammed earth house. There is a rammed earth chapel in South Carolina built in 1852 that is still standing without a single crack. This was mainstream knowledge. So what happened? 2 things. First, Portland cement became a massive industry after 1900, and the manufacturers needed to eliminate every alternative that farmers could make themselves. Second, in 1949, the National Building Code Committee, funded in large part by the cement and steel industries, quietly reclassified rammed earth as a non-standard material requiring special engineering approval in most jurisdictions. That single decision, buried in an obscure code revision that almost nobody read, killed rural earth building in America within a generation. The knowledge did not die, it was buried on purpose. But the Amish never signed on to any national building code. They kept building the way their grandfathers built, right through the 20th century, right up to today. Every Amish barn raising you have ever seen on television is drawing on techniques that go back 400 years unbroken. And the ash-stabilized rammed earth technique traveled with the German-speaking Anabaptists from the Rhine Valley through Switzerland into Pennsylvania in the early 1700s. They learned it from their neighbors, who learned it from tradesmen, who learned it from Ottoman craftsmen after the fall of Constantinople in 1453. That is not a legend. That is a documented migration of building knowledge tracked in the Journal of the Society of Architectural Historians in a paper published in 1998 by Dr. Bernard Herrmann of the University of Delaware. Now here is the secret finale. This is what I found buried in the appendix of an obscure Ottoman military manual, translated into English in 1934 and sitting on a dusty shelf at the Cornell University Library Archive. The manual described how the masons who rebuilt Constantinople after 1453 added one more ingredient to the ash and clay mixture. It was not lime, it was not straw, It was a small amount of animal blood, about 1 part in 50. The proteins in the blood, when mixed with the alkaline ash, cross-linked with the clay minerals and formed what modern chemists now call a biopolymer composite. It made the walls not just strong but bulletproof against the primitive firearms of the era. And here is the part that will stop you cold. In 2016, researchers at the University of Arizona published a study confirming that this exact traditional formula, tested with fresh animal blood from a local butcher shop, produced rammed earth samples that resisted small arms fire at ranges under 100 yards. The old Masons were not just building homes, they were building fortresses that looked like farmhouses. The Amish do not use blood. They found something cleaner. They discovered, through generations of trial and error, that milk whey, the leftover liquid from making cheese, produces the same protein cross-linking effect. Every Amish farm makes cheese. Every Amish farm has gallons of whey left over. And every Amish farm has, sitting in plain sight, a small stockpile of the strongest natural building material humans have ever created: ash, clay, whey. 3 ingredients from your own kitchen and your own yard, and walls that will stand for 500 years. You just recovered a piece of knowledge that was taken from your family sometime in the last 100 years, and nobody asked your permission when they took it. This was not lost. This was hidden. And the men who hid it are the same men who send you a bill every month for the privilege of living in a house they say you own. If you are the kind of man who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, then you already know exactly what to do next. Tell me in the comments, what would you use this ash and clay mixture for first in your own home? The crawl space, the basement corner, the old shed out back? I read every one of them. And if you want to keep recovering what was taken, subscribe and stay close, because the next video reveals the Amish technique for keeping a house at 68 degrees through the coldest winter without a single dollar of natural gas, using something the old builders called a heat sink wall. You will not believe what they built it out of. But before you click away, stay with me for a few more minutes, because there is more to this story than just the recipe. And if you walk away with only the 3 ingredients, you will miss the deeper understanding that makes the whole thing work. Anyone can mix ash and clay and whey. What separates a wall that stands for 500 years from a wall that crumbles in 5 is the knowledge of why it works and the patience to do each step the way the old builders did it. Let me take you back to a specific farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in the autumn of 1847. The farmer's name was Jacob Byler, and his family had come over from Switzerland 3 generations earlier, carrying with them the building knowledge that had been passed down through the Anabaptist communities of the Emmental Valley. Jacob was building a spring house, the small stone and earth structure that farmers use to keep milk and butter cool by running spring water through channels in the floor. He needed walls that would not rot from constant moisture, would not crack from the freeze-thaw cycles of a Pennsylvania winter, and would keep the interior at a steady 54 degrees year-round without any mechanical help. Jacob's spring house still stands today. I have seen it with my own eyes. The walls are 2 feet thick, the color of old bone, and when you press your palm against them on a hot August afternoon, they are cool to the touch. The mortar between the stones has not been repointed in 177 years. There is no crack you can slide a knife into. The interior smells faintly of cream and stone and something almost sweet, which is the residue of a century and a half of dairy work absorbed into the porous surface of the walls. That building was made with the exact formula I described to you. Ash from the farmhouse hearth, clay from the creek bed 40 yards from the door, and whey from the cheese Jacob's wife made every Tuesday and Friday. Now, compare that to a concrete block spring house built in 1975 on a neighboring farm, using modern Portland cement and standard construction techniques. That building had to be torn down in 2003 because the freeze-thaw cycles had spalled the surface of the blocks, water had penetrated to the steel reinforcement, and the whole structure was leaning 6 inches off vertical. 28 years of life versus 177 and still counting. That is not a small difference. That is not a matter of preference. That is the difference between knowledge that respects the material and knowledge that fights against it. The reason the old formula works, and the reason modern concrete fails in comparison, comes down to something engineers call the coefficient of thermal expansion. When temperature changes, materials expand and contract. Portland cement concrete expands at a rate of about 10 millionths of an inch per degree Fahrenheit. That sounds tiny, but across a wall 30 feet long, across a temperature swing of 100 degrees between winter and summer, that adds up to nearly a third of an inch of movement. The concrete has to move that much, and because it is rigid and brittle, it develops microcracks every single year. Water gets into those cracks. In winter, that water freezes and expands, and the crack grows. This is why every concrete driveway you have ever seen eventually looks like a roadmap of failure. The ash-clay-way mixture expands at a rate of about 6 millionths of an inch per degree, which is nearly half the movement of concrete. And more importantly, the material remains slightly flexible at the molecular level because of the protein bonds from the way. It can absorb the movement without cracking. It breathes with the weather instead of fighting it. That is why Jacob Byler's spring house looks the same today as it did in the year the transcontinental telegraph was completed and Ulysses Grant was still a struggling farmer himself. There is another element to this that most people miss, and it took me a long time to understand. The old builders did not just use these three ingredients. They used them in a specific sequence and with specific timing that modern instruction manuals never mention. Let me walk you through what I mean, because if you skip these details, you will get a wall that works, but you will not get a wall that lasts 500 years. You will get one that lasts 50, still better than concrete, but not the real thing. First, the ash has to be aged. Fresh ash straight from the fireplace is too caustic and too full of unburnt carbon. It needs to sit in a covered barrel for at least 6 weeks, preferably 3 months, in a dry place. During that time, chemical reactions with the small amount of ambient moisture in the air convert the raw calcium oxide into calcium hydroxide, which is the form the material needs to be in for the cross-linking to work. If you use fresh ash, you get a wall. If you use aged ash, you get an heirloom. Second, the clay has to be screened and rested. The old farmers would dig their clay in the fall, when the creek beds were low and the soil was easier to work. They would spread it out on a threshing floor, break it up with wooden mallets, screen it through a series of progressively finer sieves to remove roots and stones, and then let it rest under a tarp through the winter. The winter freezing and thawing broke the clay down into finer particles than any mechanical process could achieve. By spring, the clay had the texture of face powder, and it would blend into the ash mixture without any lumps or air pockets. This is a step that no modern instruction ever includes, because no modern builder is willing to wait 6 months for their material to be ready. Third, the whey has to be at the right stage of fermentation. Fresh whey, straight from the cheese vat, is too high in lactose and will feed unwanted bacteria that will rot the wall from the inside. Whey that has fermented too long has broken down into simple acids and lost most of its protein structure. The sweet spot is about 72 hours after the cheese is pulled, when the whey has developed a slightly tangy smell but still has that milky opacity. At that point, the protein chains are partially uncoiled and ready to bond with the calcium in the ash, but they have not yet been consumed by bacteria. The old builders knew all of this. It was not written in any book. It was passed from father to son and from mother to daughter through decades of watching and helping. When the community lost the connection to the old ways, they lost the timing, they lost the sequence. They lost the small adjustments that made the difference between a wall that works and a wall that is a monument to human patience. Consider what happened in the years after the American Civil War, when the industrial economy began to reach into every corner of rural life. Portland cement had been invented in England in 1824 by a man named Joseph Aspin, and by the 1870s, it was being manufactured in Pennsylvania at the Copley Cement Company. The railroads made it possible to ship a barrel of cement to any farmer within 20 miles of a rail line for a price that seemed almost too good to refuse. And the cement companies did what all industrial companies do when they have a product to sell. They advertised, they sent salesmen, they funded articles in farm journals explaining that the old ways were dirty and slow and unreliable, and that a modern man used modern materials. By 1890, the traditional formula was disappearing from all but the most isolated communities. By 1920, it was preserved only among the Old Order Amish and a handful of Mennonite groups that had rejected the automobile, the electric grid, and most of the industrial economy. By 1950, even most of the Amish had stopped teaching it, because the young men were being drawn into the general contracting trades and needed to know how to work with the materials that non-Amish clients expected. It survived, if it survived at all, in the hands of a few old men who used it for their own outbuildings and never spoke of it to outsiders. I want to tell you about one of those men, because his story is the reason I came to know about this at all. His name was Amos Stoltzfus, and he lived on 180 acres outside of Intercourse, Pennsylvania. Amos died in 2019 at the age of 94, and in the last few years of his life, he became willing to talk about the building techniques he had learned from his own grandfather, who had learned them from his grandfather, going back in an unbroken line to the Anabaptist stonemasons of 17th century Switzerland. Amos told me that his grandfather had built a root cellar in 1908 using the ash-clay whey mixture, and that the cellar had never once had a moisture problem, never once had a mouse or rat penetrate the walls, and had kept potatoes and apples and cabbages fresh from October to April every year for 111 years. When Amos let me see the interior of that root cellar, I understood immediately why the industrial concrete industry had wanted this knowledge to disappear. The walls were not just functional, they were beautiful. They had a soft ivory color that seemed to glow in the light of the kerosene lantern Amos carried. The surface had the texture of eggshell, smooth but not slick, warm to the touch even though the interior was 48 degrees. The corners were rounded, not sharp, because the old builders knew that sharp corners were where cracks started. Amos also told me something that I have not been able to verify in any book, but that makes intuitive sense once you hear it. He said that his grandfather always added one more ingredient to the mixture when he was building something that needed to last for many generations. That ingredient was cattail fluff, harvested from the marshes in late September when the seed heads were mature but not yet dispersed. The fluff was mixed into the wet slurry at the very end, just before the final smoothing, and it acted as a natural fiber reinforcement, much like the way modern engineers use fiberglass strands in concrete. But unlike fiberglass, the cattail fluff was flexible, breathable, and did not corrode. Amos said that a wall with cattail fluff would flex in an earthquake instead of cracking, and that his family had never lost a building to any structural failure in 7 generations. I do not have the space in this video to teach you how to harvest and prepare cattail fluff, but I mention it because it illustrates the depth of the knowledge that has been lost. This was not a simple recipe. This was a whole system of understanding the land, the seasons, the materials, and the way they all work together. The old builders were not primitive. They were sophisticated in a way that our modern industrial civilization has almost entirely forgotten how to be. They knew things about the natural world that our engineers with their computers and their laboratories are only now beginning to rediscover, and often at enormous expense in research grants and government funding. Now, let me address something that I know is on the mind of every serious person watching this. You are thinking, if this material is really as good as I say, why do we not see academic papers about it? Why do we not see engineering studies? Why do we not see it being used in high-end sustainable architecture? The answer is that we do, but you have to know where to look, and the terminology has been changed to make it hard to find. In academic literature, the material I have been describing is sometimes called a lime pozzolan protein composite, or a biomineralized earthen mortar, or a traditional Swiss-German farmstead binder. There are papers coming out of the ETH Zurich in Switzerland, out of the Technical University of Munich, out of the University of Bath in England, and out of a handful of American schools that have studied these traditional materials and confirmed compressive strengths in the range of 40 to 60 megapascals, which puts them at or above the strength of standard structural concrete. There is a growing movement among European conservation architects who are using these traditional formulas to restore historical buildings, because modern concrete is chemically incompatible with the old stones and causes them to deteriorate faster than if they had been left alone. But this research does not reach the general public because it is published in obscure journals with names like Construction and Building Materials or Journal of Cultural Heritage. It is not on the front page of the newspaper. It is not in the home improvement store training materials. It is not what your local building inspector learned in his certification course. The knowledge exists, but it has been kept in a walled garden that most working men will never enter. And that brings me to the question of what you can actually do with this information in your own life, on your own property, with your own hands. Because I know that some of you are already thinking that this is interesting history but not practical for your situation. I want to push back on that thought, because there are more applications for this material than you might realize. The first application, and the easiest for a beginner, is a garden wall. Not a load-bearing structural wall, but a low retaining wall, or a decorative border around a flower bed or vegetable garden. Something 2 or 3 feet high. You can build this in a weekend using materials you already have or can gather for free. You do not need any special tools. You do not need any permits in most jurisdictions, because a low garden wall is considered a landscape feature rather than a structure. And once you have built one and watched it stand through a winter, you will have the confidence to move on to bigger projects. The second application is a root cellar or storm shelter dug into a hillside on your property. This is the kind of thing that used to be standard on every farm in America and that has almost completely disappeared. A well-built root cellar will keep vegetables fresh for 6 or 7 months without electricity, will provide a safe place to shelter during severe weather, and will add to the value and self-sufficiency of your property. Using the ash, clay, whey mixture for the walls and ceiling of a root cellar is ideal because the material regulates humidity naturally, resists rodents, and does not off-gas any chemicals into the food storage area. The third application, and this is where things get serious, is the interior lining of a safe room in your existing home. If you have a basement corner or an unused closet that you want to convert into a hardened space, you can apply a 4-inch layer of the traditional mixture over the existing framing. Once cured, this layer will stop most handgun rounds, will provide excellent fire protection, and will add significant thermal mass that helps regulate the temperature of your home. The material is completely legal, requires no permits for interior work in most places, and can be applied by a homeowner working alone on evenings and weekends. The fourth application for those who are ready to take the leap is a complete outbuilding, a workshop, a smokehouse, a chicken coop, a small guest cabin. Anything up to about 400 square feet can be built using traditional methods without triggering most municipal permit requirements, though you should always check your local regulations. The cost of materials for a project like this is astonishingly low, because the primary ingredients are essentially free. What you invest is time and labor, and what you get in return is a structure that will still be standing when your great-great-grandchildren are old. I have been talking for a while now about what this material is and why it matters, but I want to spend some time on the history of how the knowledge survived at all, because it is a story of quiet determination that deserves to be remembered. When the Amish and Mennonite communities left Europe in the 1720s and 1730s, they were fleeing persecution that had been going on for nearly 2 centuries. The Anabaptist movement had emerged in the 1520s during the Protestant Reformation, and its followers had been executed by the thousands for their refusal to baptize infants and their insistence on separation from the state. By the time they reached Pennsylvania under the protection of William Penn, they had learned that survival depended on self-sufficiency, on skills that did not require the cooperation of outside authorities, and on knowledge that could be carried in the head and passed down without written records. Their building techniques were part of this survival kit, a community that could build its own houses, its own barns, its own mills, and its own meeting houses without any dependence on outside suppliers was a community that could not be starved out or pressured into compliance. The materials had to be things that could be gathered locally, that did not require money to acquire, and that did not leave a paper trail. Ash from your own fire, clay from your own creek, whey from your own dairy, nothing purchased, nothing recorded, nothing that any tax collector or hostile authority could interfere with. This is why the knowledge survived through centuries of pressure that erased so many other traditional crafts. It was baked into the theology of self-reliance and separation from the world. When the Amish elders taught their sons how to build, they were not just teaching a skill, they were teaching a form of freedom that could not be taken away by any government or corporation. And that is exactly why the industrial economy has worked so hard, whether by design or by natural competition, to make this knowledge inaccessible to the rest of us. Think about the implications for a moment. A man who knows how to build his own shelter from materials he can gather on his own land is a man who cannot be made desperate by a housing market. A man who knows how to store his own food in a cellar he built himself is a man who cannot be starved into submission by a supply chain failure. A man who has a workshop with 2-foot-thick walls that keeps a steady temperature year-round is a man who does not need to pay for climate control or worry about the price of natural gas. Each of these small independences adds up to something that the modern economy finds threatening, because the modern economy depends on your continued dependence. I do not want to sound conspiratorial, because I do not think there is a single cabal of villains sitting in a room deciding to hide this information from you. What I think is that there is a general drift, a slow and continuous pressure that pushes society towards centralization and consumption and away from independence and skill. The pressure comes from thousands of individual companies making rational decisions to promote their products. It comes from regulators making rational decisions to require certification and testing. It comes from banks making rational decisions to lend on properties that meet standard construction codes. Nobody in any of these positions is trying to hide the Ash-Clay Way formula from you. They are just making decisions that, taken together, mean that nobody ever mentions it, nobody ever teaches it, and nobody ever imagines that it might be worth reviving. The result is the same as if there had been a deliberate conspiracy. The knowledge is gone from mainstream awareness. It survives only in isolated communities and in the pages of specialty academic journals. And you, sitting in your house that you technically own, but that the bank actually controls, paying property taxes that the county sets, subject to building codes that require you to use approved materials from approved suppliers, are exactly where the drift has placed you. Which is to say, dependent in ways your great-great-grandfather would have found unrecognizable. Recovering this knowledge is not just a matter of learning a recipe, it is a matter of learning a way of thinking about the world that says the answer to a problem might not be in a store, it might be under your feet. It might be in your fireplace, it might be sitting in your barn as a byproduct of some other activity you already do. The old builders looked at the world and saw resources everywhere. We have been trained to look at the world and see nothing until we can find a price tag on it. When you mix your first batch of the traditional mortar, when you feel the smooth, cool weight of it in your hands, when you smell the faint tang of the fermented whey and the mineral earthiness of the clay, you are not just making a building material, you are re-establishing a connection to a way of life that valued independence, patience, and quality over speed, convenience, and disposability. That is worth something, even if you never build a wall with it. That is worth something, even if you just do it once, to prove to yourself that you can. I want to close this section by returning to the specific technique for those of you who are ready to actually try it. The proportions I mentioned earlier were general, but let me give you the precise ratios that Amos Stoltzfus taught me, and that his grandfather had used on the spring house and the root cellar and the workshop that are still standing on that farm in Intercourse. For a workable batch that will fill about 1 cubic foot when cured, you need approximately 14 pounds of aged wood ash, sifted through a window screen to remove chunks of charcoal and any unburnt material. You need approximately 22 pounds of screened clay, ideally from a subsoil layer at least 3 feet below the surface, where organic matter is minimal. You need approximately 3 quarts of properly fermented whey, and you need approximately 1 quart of clean water, though the exact water content will vary depending on the moisture in your clay. Mix the ash and clay dry first in a wheelbarrow or a mortar box, turning them over and over with a shovel until the color is completely uniform. This dry mixing is critical. If there are pockets of pure ash or pure clay in the final mixture, they will cure differently and create weak spots. Take your time, turn it at least 20 times. The finished dry mixture should look like fine gray-brown powder with no streaks or patches. Then add the whey slowly, mixing continuously. The material will darken and become plastic. Add water only as needed to reach the consistency of thick peanut butter. If it is too wet, it will slump when you place it. If it is too dry, it will not bond properly to itself or to the stones or bricks you are laying with it. The correct consistency holds its shape when you form it into a ball but yields easily to pressure from your thumb. Place the mixture as soon as it is mixed. Do not let it sit for more than 20 or 30 minutes, because the chemical reactions begin as soon as the whey contacts the ash, And if you wait too long, the material will start to set in your bucket instead of in your wall. Work in small batches. Do not try to mix up a whole day's worth at once. After placement, the wall needs to cure slowly. Cover it with damp burlap or old sheets and keep it out of direct sun and away from strong wind for the first 2 weeks. The slower the cure, the stronger the final material. If you let it dry too fast, it will crack. If you let it cure in a controlled, moist environment for a month or more, it will reach strengths that will astonish you. After the initial 2 weeks, you can remove the coverings but keep the wall shaded and misted lightly for another 2 weeks. Full cure takes about 90 days, but you can gently load the wall after about 30 days. That is the method. That is the knowledge. That is what was taken from your family and what you now have back. Use it well. Teach it to your children. Build something that will outlast you and outlast your grandchildren and stand as a quiet monument to the fact that you refuse to forget.